This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you like underground music, movies, and more, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed merch, vinyl, CDs, and more. Plug in the discount code 10OFF, TENOFF, for a 10% discount at portlanddistro.com. Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Everything Went Black. It's another episode of Heavy Metal Massacre with J Bennet, and this week we're going to be talking about the new wave of British heavy metal. How's it going, Jay?
It's going good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm gearing up. Got some road work ahead. Things are looking up in the music world, and when this episode airs, I will have completed the first bunch of dates that we're playing on the road with Cloak. The first bunch of dates of this short tour that we have coming up with Cloak and Restless Spirit. Just a quick run down the East Coast. And of course, later this spring, we're going to be hitting the road with Origin and Abysmal Dawn for a fairly extensive jaunt across the U.S. So yeah, that's all good news.
Yeah, man. I have the your Origin date marked on my calendar. I wish the Cloak tour was coming here. I like that band quite a bit, and Black Mare did a couple of shows with them a couple of years ago. We played on a crazy bill in San Diego. It was us, Cloak, Spirit Adrift, and Church of Misery.
Right on. Oh, Church of Misery is that Japanese doom band, right?
Yeah. And then so that was like, I can't remember. It was either a couple days before or a couple days after Psycho Vegas, and then we played Psycho Vegas right before Cloak on the like the club stage, I guess. That was like the last year that Psycho Vegas was at the Hard Rock, I believe. Is that right? Or was it the second last? I can't remember. I can't remember. But anyway, we played twice with them, like in a couple of days, basically, and they were cool, and they're nice guys, and I like the band. So I'm psyched. I wish that one was coming here, but it's not.
Yeah, this was put together in the middle of the Omicron wave of COVID, mm-hmm. So there was a lot of like reluctance to even book shows. But we got these dates together. I like their music. I'm a fan of Cloaks, and I met one of the guys briefly when they came through Brooklyn on tour with 1349 a few years ago, and he seemed like a really nice guy. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, man. It's gonna be good,
Yeah. That reminds me, I caught them here in LA on that 1349 tour as well.
Yeah. But so this week we're going to be talking about the new wave of British heavy metal, which is that term gets thrown around quite a bit when trying to describe other bands.
Yeah.
And I have some ideas about my definition of it, and for the actual new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah.
But honestly, I feel like you're way more well versed in this particular movement than I am. I like a lot of the bands, but just the machinations that underlie the mechanism behind the new wave of British heavy metal, I feel like you have probably a deeper understanding of those things than I do.
Well, I will say, there are a lot of waves out there in metal.
Yeah.
And this is my favorite one. This is my favorite wave. New wave. They're all new waves too. You got to have no one wants to hear the old wave. It's a new wave every time. There's a new wave of American heavy metal that came later, and a new wave of Swedish heavy metal, I think, is a thing. But this is my favorite one. Yeah. And I guess, I don't know, do you want me to sort of give you my like understanding of it?
Sure.
I think so. The way I kind of think of it is, okay, so you have like the original. Okay, now here's the old wave.
Yeah, let's tell us about the old wave first. So we have some context here, The
old wave, I mean, you could also say that's the original wave of heavy metal. You have like, these bands that started in the late 60s, early 70s, your Black Sabbath is the obvious one. For whatever reason, you had these bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple that were sort of lumped into people. They were referred to as heavy metal, even though, I mean, they're kind of like, now we understand those bands as like hard rock bands, I guess. And then you have bands like, there's ones that are kind of in the middle, that like they're not as old as Sabbath and Zeppelin, and they're not as new as some of the bands we're going to talk about today. But you have like Judas Priest and Motorhead are the two big ones that stand out, because I think, Judas Priest, I think their first record is 1974, and they might have started a few years before that. And then Motorhead, which sometimes is actually associated with New Wave of British heavy metal. I kind of understand them as preceding it as well. And they certainly did precede a lot of the bands we're going to talk about today. But like sort of the bands that have come to define, I guess, the new wave of British heavy metal, the big ones are, Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, and to a lesser degree, in terms of, worldwide dominance, Saxon is another like big one that came out of there, even though obviously Saxon is not nearly as big as a Def Leppard or an Iron Maiden. But I would say one of the most important bands to come out of the new wave of British heavy metal is Diamond Head, which is a band that I know you're familiar with and a lot of listeners will be familiar with. I believe their first single came out in 1980, and their first album, Lightning to the Nations, came out in 1980. Now, what's remarkable about that album, other than it's fucking awesome on its own, it has 7 songs. 4 of those songs were later covered by Metallica, which I think says a lot about like their sort of influence on what we, what's understood as heavy metal today, given that Metallica has been and continues to be sort of the biggest band in metal, and have been that way for, decades now at this point. But yeah, Diamond Head. And I know, a lot of people, and I think you have an experience with this too, a lot of people found out about Diamond Head from Metallica.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sort of the Garage Days Revisited EP that they did. So they have Master Puppets comes out. They go on tour. They have the horrible, tragic bus accident in Europe that kills Cliff Burton. Jason Newsted becomes the bass player. Everyone knows the story. The first thing they do before they do a new album is they do this covers EP, this Garage Days Revisited EP. Now, this EP is much like Lightning to the Nations, the Diamond album. This EP in itself is remarkable. From this EP, they covered Diamond Head, they cover Budgie, a Welsh band called Budgie. They cover Killing Joke, I believe.
Yeah.
And the Misfits, and someone else is on there that I'm forgetting.
Holocaust,
right.
Yeah.
So I found out about all of those bands from that tape.
Oh yeah, me too, man. As a matter of fact, my whole awareness of the term new wave or British heavy metal can be traced back to an interview I heard on the radio with Lars Ulrich. And this is like back, like I'd already discovered Iron Maiden. I'd heard of Motorhead. I had no idea what any of these bands, like what movement or, any of these terminologies or anything. And then Lars Ulrich was on on a pre-recorded interview that played on WestCon, WXCI, like on the Metal Shop, like a Friday night, like 11 o'clock, show.
Yeah.
And they played this interview with Lars Ulrich. And in that same night, I found out about new wave of British heavy metal and black metal, because he talked about Venom, right?
Yeah.
And years later, I pick up the Garage Days Revisited record, and I'm like, oh, these songs are sick, man. This is like some sick Metallica songs. And I didn't even, except for the Misfits stuff, which I'm like, oh, they're doing some Misfits covers, And then I to my embarrassment, I learned that every song was a tribute to bands that they respected and probably felt influenced by.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you know, I just finished reading Brian Tatler's book, and he was the guitar player of Diamond Head, and he talks about way before Metallica existed. Lars Ulrich was just a teenager here in Downey, California, and he was a big fan of all these new wave of British heavy metal bands. This is what he was listening to, and he came over to England. And I forget what part of England Diamond Head are from, but he went there and he stayed in Brian Tatler's like living room at his mom's house. Brian Tatler's like living with his mom, you know, he's still like, he's only a few years older than Lars, living with his mom. Lars Ulrich is like stays at the guy's house for like weeks and goes to and like travels with them to all these Diamond Head playing gigs around England, you know, and he's kind of like hanging on, like kind of a hanger, becomes like a hanger on of like, but he's a super fan, you know what I mean? And they think he's just kind of like, you know, they're like, oh, okay, you know, he's just kind of like motor mouth, like Danish kid. He's a heavy metal fan. They didn't, you know, think anything of it. Like, oh, we have a super fan, cool, you know. And it's not like Diamond Head had tons of fans at this point, you know. So he goes back, Lars goes back to America, and he stays in touch with Brian Tatler, and he starts sending letters about like how he's gonna, you know, he's gonna start his own band, so Brian Tatler becomes sort of like this sort of very distant sort of observer of the formation of Metallica in the form of these letters that he's exchanging with Lars, you know, across the Atlantic Ocean, which is just, I mean, it's crazy. And so, you know, Brian Tatler kind of says it repeatedly in this book. It's like, you know, we just thought he was like this motor mouth kid. Like we had no idea like what he would do or what he would become, you know what I mean? He was just like a super fan, you know, which is crazy to think about. So, I mean, I guess next time, you know, anyone listening, if you're a band out there and you encounter what, you know, we fondly refer to as punishers, those people, those fans that seem a little too into it, you never know. Then one of those kids could be the next Lars Ulrich.
And that kind of goes back to like my impressions of the new wave of British heavy metal bands. I mean, you know, if you think about, we'll call it like the original wave of heavy metal, like Sabbath and, you know, Zeppelin, massive arena rock bands. Okay. And in my perception of new wave of British heavy metal, these bands were like, you know, more street level. They weren't, I'm not going to use the term punk because I know heavy metal heads back then and punks were completely on opposite sides of the spectrum. But playing in small clubs, a lot of these bands were kind of like maybe even at the same level that bands like you and I play in, you know, where it's like, yeah, I got a couple fans, you can play a couple of these cities, you know, play in these like pubs and whatever. And it was more of like a no frills operation. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that is 100% true of most of the bands that and certainly they all started that way. Even the biggest ones, even the Iron Maidens and the Def Leppards, they all started playing in little shitty pubs in the UK, you know. But a lot of these bands never quite made it past that stage. But as we'll discuss later, a lot of these bands produced, a lot of musicians came out of these bands that went on to do much bigger things.
Right, exactly. And actually, speaking of, I mean, Maiden became probably arguably one of the biggest heavy metal bands on the planet. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? Absolutely. And but they toiled away in the pubs for like 12 years before they were like, you know, for anything hit for them. All these different singers, even before Paul Di'Anno.
Yeah, it was quite some time. Yeah, it's true. A lot of these bands struggled. I think I don't know how long Def Leppard was at it. I could go back and look it up, but I think Def Leppard kind of maybe had success a little quicker than Maiden did. But and then a lot of these bands, they became so incestuous. You know what I mean? you have, of course, everyone knows the story. We talked about this in one of our previous Metal Massacres when we were talking about our mutual appreciation of Paul Di'Anno, who of course was the singer on the first two Iron Maiden records and the Made in Japan EP. He was replaced by Bruce Dickinson. Everyone knows that story. But Bruce Dickinson came from another new wave of British heavy metal band called Samson. And then there was a really obscure new wave of British heavy metal band called White Spirit. And Yannick Gers, who is now in Maiden. Now they have 3 guitar players now. And Yannick Gers, he came from this new wave of British heavy metal band, White Spirit. There was another band, Sweet Savage, which I believe was also, they had a song called Killing Time that Metallica also covered. The guitar player of Sweet Savage was a guy named Vivian Campbell, who went on to play with Dio and Whitesnake, and now he's in Def Leppard.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so there's so many guys. Another way, and this is one of Lars's favorite bands from this, group of bands, was a band called Tigers of Pantang. And they had this hotshot guitar player named John Sykes, who went on to join Thin Lizzy and played on what a lot of people like Thunder and Lightning, which was the last proper Thin Lizzy record. And it's also like the heaviest Thin Lizzy record by a lot. It's like what Thin Lizzy fans refer to as the Thin Lizzy's metal record. John Sykes is on that record. And then he went on to join Whitesnake and played on that huge self-titled Whitesnake album in 1987 with, Here I Go Again, Still of the Night, when they were all over MTV. That was John Sykes on that record.
The crazy thing about that record, that was like the redefining of Whitesnake in a lot of ways, because they had existed. It was literally it was ex-members of Deep Purple that formed Whitesnake.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And what's crazy is a lot of those songs on that record, that 87 self-titled record, were older Whitesnake songs that were kind of revamped, that they re-recorded and kind of updated and had like metalized, because early Whitesnake is more of like a bluesier type band, more hard rock, bluesy, closer to Deep Purple.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if I already told this story on here, but it's my favorite one. Here I Go Again originally came out. Whitesnake put it on a record in I don't know, like 1980 or 81, something like that, like years prior to that, the years prior to the version that everyone knows. And there's a video for that also that you can see on YouTube, that version, that original version. And the line in the song is, the line in the version everyone knows is like a drifter, I was born to walk alone. The original line was like a hobo, I was born to walk alone. And David Coverdale changed it because he thought hobo sounded too much like homo.
Drifter is a better, that, all jokes aside, it just it's cooler to say it like a drifter, I walk alone. It's just cooler,
It's way better.
Yeah.
And then so you have all these other, and then there were other other new wave of British heavy metal bands like Holocaust, you mentioned earlier, and Blitzkrieg. These bands were also covered by Metallica. There was like a version of Kill 'Em All had their Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg had a song called Blitzkrieg that Metallica covered, and I think it was on Kill 'Em All. Like there was versions of Kill 'Em All that had 2 covers tacked on to the end, and Blitzkrieg was one of them. And I'm kind of blanking on the other one, but was it the Holocaust song? I can't remember. And of course there was Girl School, which was the all-female rock band that were part of the new wave of British heavy metal. And they became a favorite of Lemmy's. And of course there was they did a couple of collaborations together, Motorhead and Girl School, like covering each other's songs and doing like 7 Inches and other singles and stuff like that. Like there was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre single, I remember. It's like I have that somewhere. And I believe, if I remember it, it's like Motorhead on one side covering a Girls' School song, and Girls' School on the other side covering a Motorhead song. But they did other stuff where they joined forces and were all playing together on different stuff too.
See, this is the kind of thing I like about the new wave of British heavy metal. Is like it is almost like a DIY kind of vibe. Like there's a couple of labels that put out you know, a lot of these bands' early records. You know, and some of these bands, their entire career was on independent labels. Like, you know, they never really had major label success or ever really left the UK, probably. Maybe with a couple of forays to Germany or something like that, but never toward the States, certainly, you know.
Yeah, and Neat Records, out of which was based, I believe, in Newcastle, was like a big driving force of this stuff. They put out a lot of their early albums and singles of these bands, not all of them, but plenty. And they had a guy who was like working in Neat Records was a label, but it was also, I believe, originally a recording studio that kind of became a label. They branched out into putting out records. And they had a guy who was there working as like a gopher, sort of like studio assistant. Conrad Lant was his name. And Conrad Lant talked the owner of Neat into putting out a single of his own band, Conrad's band, which of course became Venom. And we now know Conrad Lant as Kronos. And Venom is, I mean, they're one of my favorites, and they're, you know, they came up at the same time. They're very much associated with the new wave of British heavy metal. But what's interesting about them is they sounded, a lot of these other bands, they had a lot of things in common. It was, a lot of this stuff was very melodic. A lot of these bands had two guitar players and were kind of, you know, taking advantage of that situation, you know, harmonizing and things like that. Venom was a three-piece. If you know what Venom sounds like, there's not a lot of melody happening. But like they're sort of like at the same time, Venom are like single-handedly responsible for, you know, thrash and black metal probably wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for Venom. They inspired Metallica, and just as much as they inspired, you know, the sort of the Mayhems and Emperors of the world. So they're a key band in this, and they were from the time and the place, even though like sonically they had almost nothing in common with the rest of these bands we're talking about.
I would venture to say even Motorhead too, and I think the only reason why Venom and Motorhead are both included in this roster of bands is because of proximity and time frame. You know, I mean,
yeah,
you know, Motorhead was just basically heavy, fast Chuck Berry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Kronos was very much a Motorhead fan. Like the whole like three piece with a bass playing singer, which is what Kronos was. I mean, that all a bass player playing like distorted. You know, that all came from Motorhead, and Venom took that to like, you know, the sort of logical extreme, I guess you could say. You know.
Yeah, and both of those bands also, you know, they appeal to punks too, and which was unusual back then because, you know, I mean, the late '70s, I wasn't aware of any of this stuff. You know, I was a kid. You know what I mean? I was like a little boy at that time. And, but in the '80s, when I started really learning about this stuff, you know, retroactively, I discovered what, you know, the new wave of British heavy metal was because Lars Ulrich would talk about how great these bands were and how they influenced Metallica. But that's when I started seeing, like, I would go and see shows and I would see punk rock style people. You would see the occasional dude, like a skinhead or something, wearing a Motorhead t-shirt, you know, and the same thing with Venom. Like Venom was a little bit more peripheral, but like punks, like kids that were into like G.G. Allen and stuff like that, most likely were into like Motorhead and Venom too.
Yeah, man, it's so crazy. I mean, obviously, I was like, you know, a little toddler at this point too. But almost every sort of resource that you can find for this stuff, like whether it's interviews, you know, books that have been written, all up and down the line, and I've been reading a lot of old Motorhead interviews too. That's a big thing that's repeated over and over again. How like Motorhead was the band that the punks and the metalheads could agree on, and it was like one of the only ones that they could agree on, you know, which is a feat in and of itself. I mean, now those kind of barriers don't exist nearly as much. You know, it's a lot more fluid. But you know, at that time, late 70s, early 80s, I mean, there was you were you were either with us or you were with the terrorists, you know.
Well, actually, it's funny. Harley Flanagan from the Cro-Mags cites Motorhead and Venom as huge influences on his playing and approach to music. You know, in addition to like, you know, Mahavishnu Orchestra and all this like jazz stuff that dude's into. But I saw Motorhead and the Cro-Mags together at the Channel in Boston in, I think it was 1987.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that was the first time I'd never seen Motorhead before because I was only like 18 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most terrifying experiences because of the crowd at that show, man. It was like just the gnarliest of gnarly, dangerous, criminal-esque people I can imagine. Like, you know, and I'm just like this young kid, man. And but it was great. It was awesome. It was like one of the greatest. It still goes down as one of the top 5 shows I've ever seen.
Oh, I'm jealous, man. That's so cool. I would have loved to have seen Motorhead and the Cro-Mags in the 80s. You know, it's funny. Like when I've spoken with Harley before too, and so I know that he's like loves Motorhead and he loves Mahavishnu Orchestra. The only other person I've ever spoken with who will cite those two bands as an influence, which couldn't be farther apart, right? Like Motorhead and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Wino. Yeah. Wino is the guy. He loves both those bands, which it's such an interesting combination, you know.
I just saw Wino at the Mayhem show in New York City recently.
And is he what kind of condition was he in?
You know, the same.
The same. Yeah. He's like frozen in time. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, I don't know. He's like one of these he's like Keith Richards or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He has a phenomenal head of hair.
Yeah, great hair. Very white. It's white now, though. You know what I mean? He's into that whole silver fox era of his life, I guess. You know,
it's working for him, man. Yeah. It's working for him.
So Venom and Motorhead are probably the exceptions, but most of these other bands, I feel sonically, they did exactly what you were saying. Like the sound of new wave of British heavy metal is like harmonized guitars, more intense tempos than like for the previous version of heavy metal.
Yes.
And, careening vocals, very grandiose sort of vocal approaches, I think, for the most part. And bands like Metallica and the early Slayer, that's where I really saw that influence. Like that's when it was like the reflection of those early records by both of those bands.
Yeah.
Defined retroactively my point of view of new wave of British heavy metal. Because, it was already kind of over with by the time I was aware of it,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too. Yeah. But I certainly appreciate, more and more of these bands in retrospect. Some other ones worth mentioning, there's a really obscure Welsh band. They were called Persian Risk. They've got some good tunes. The singles are kind of hard to find, I think. But they had a guitar player named Phil Campbell, who, as we know, later joined Motorhead. So it's another example of these, these sort of bands. These bands were pretty obscure even in their time, and a lot of these guys from them went on to much greener pastures. And then two of my favorite new wave of British heavy metal bands, Angel Witch, we've got to mention, of course. They put out a great self-titled record that was like 80 or 81. And then I think they broke up in the 80s at some point. They put out a couple more records that kind of weren't amazing or something. And they broke up and they came back like in, 2011 or something?
Yeah, I remember that sort of reunion thing they were doing.
Yeah, and they put out a great record, and then another one like in 2019, and it's like really good. And it's I think so Kevin Hayborne is the singer and guitar player, and it's still him. And then they kind of have a I think he has kind of a rotating cast of characters, playing the other instruments. I know Will Palmer at one point was the bass player. I'm not sure if he still is. And then the other one, Witchfinder General, which, they were very much in the style of Black Sabbath, but the faster Sabbath, the sabotage Sabbath, you could say.
Yeah.
And they put out two great records in the early 80s. And then and now they a lot of times they get associated with the, as the forebears of this doom, what's called doom now, much as Black Sabbath are, sort of the godfathers of that. But Witchfinder General, they had a front man, and his name was Zeeb Parks. That was not his real name, as far as I know, but that was the name that he used on those records. I don't know what his real name was, but he disappeared. He disappeared. Yeah, this is crazy. So he disappeared. Like, no one seems to know who he is. And there's, I know people like Lee Dorian from Rise Above, and like who has much more, many more contacts, and has tried to hunt him down, I believe, to a certain extent. There seems to be there's some rumors that I don't really want to repeat. They involve prison, but how he got there, I wouldn't want to say. But I don't even know if that's true. Maybe he just pulled a disappearing act. I don't know I don't know where he is, but it's one of the sort of like unsolved mysteries of heavy metal, and that sort of falls under this umbrella of the new wave of British heavy metal that we're talking about.
Was he maybe abducted by aliens or something like that? And
a girl can dream,
and then like he's just going to show up again. Like,
you never know.
Covered in like ectoplasm somewhere.
Yeah. Witchfinder General were also notable because I believe both their albums had tits on the cover.
Like bare breasts?
Bare-breasted women, yes. And they always had some scene of like these, witchfinders, these pilgrim-looking, guys with the buckled hats or whatever, chasing down these women. They were going to, burn them at the stake because they must be witches or whatever. And of course, oops, the women, they slipped and fell, and things pop out, and that was the moment that was caught by the photographer, of course, and put on the cover of the album.
Are you familiar with the film Witchfinder General, starring one Vincent Price?
Late great Vincent Price. That is such a great film, and I have a funny personal story about that. So, the Witchfinder General, so that movie. So the band is named after that movie, the Vincent Price movie, and Vincent Price's character is based on a real historical character his name was Matthew Hopkins, and that was his thing. He was a witch finder, right? So part of my family is from England, and my mom's on my mom's side, and my mom's maiden name is Hopkins.
Uh-oh.
So I hope that we're not related to that asshole. I hope we're not related to that asshole, but it's possible,
Yeah, and then that would make you a descendant of a symbol of the patriarchy, man.
I know, and not only that, and then on top of everything else, I had to go to Catholic school for 12 years, which makes it, so much worse. So,
in Europe, that was the only place where that's where they burned witches, was in Europe. In the States, like in Massachusetts, it was the hanging, which was the preferred execution method of
or drowning.
Drowning. Yeah, well, there was a whole thing about floating versus drowning and all this other stuff that happens. It's it's all grim, horrible stuff.
Yeah. I think what I wanted to mention for anyone out there who is kind of maybe less familiar with this stuff and is interested in exploring more, There's a great, maybe I shouldn't be recommending this because I know that physical copies are hard to find, and I'm not sure if it's actually available digitally, the compilation itself, but all the songs on this compilation, you can find them digitally for sure. But so there was a compilation that was curated by Lars Ulrich and this guy, Jeff Barton, who was the editor of Sounds in the 70s and 80s in England. And Sounds magazine was a big champion of the new wave of British heavy metal. They were kind of responsible for, spreading the word about this stuff across the UK. So Jeff Barton, the Sounds editor, and Lars Ulrich, they put together this compilation called New Wave of British Heavy Metal 79 Revisited. It came out in 1990. Metal Blade put it out. And it's got tracks by all the bands pretty much all the bands we've mentioned here. Certainly Maiden, early Def Leppard stuff, Saxon, Diamond Head, Venom, Tigers of Pantang, Girl School. I believe Sweet Savage is on there, Blitzkrieg. I know it's interesting. There's a double vinyl that has all this stuff, and then there's a CD version that has 5 extra tracks. And I believe Witchfinder General is on the CD version, if I have that right. But that is a great compilation that kind of gives you an overview of this kind of stuff, like with the, from the bigger bands, the Maidens, the Def Leppards, down to these real obscure bands. Like there's a great band that has a song on that compilation called Gaskin. And there's a song, the song is called I'm No Fool. And it's such a great track. And they're one of these obscure bands that, didn't do much. I think they put out maybe 2 albums and a couple singles, but they kind of languished in obscurity.
I imagine this compilation is on Spotify or Apple somewhere because I know on Apple Music, Neat Records put out a bunch of these compilations, and if Metal Blade was involved, I'm sure they're going to want to have this stuff at least digitally available, like on some streaming services.
Well, we can look it up. I think there's a story about this. Let's see if it's up there. Hold on, I'm typing into. Oh, no, okay. So someone has a playlist up here on Spotify right now. They've recreated the album.
Oh, great!
It's called New Wave of British Heavy Metal 79 Revisited, but the album itself is not on there. And so there's a weird thing that happened. So years and years and years ago, I was trying to track down this LP, this double LP compilation, because I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find a used copy. I couldn't find a new copy, nothing. I contacted Metal Blade, and they told me they had a warehouse in Arizona at this time. This is probably 15 years ago at this point, maybe 20 years ago. They had a warehouse in Arizona. And they said, well, here's the guy at the warehouse. If we have any of this stuff, like dead stock sitting around, he would know. So I hit up this guy, and he goes, yeah, he's like, here's the thing. He's like, we don't let people know that we have this. We're not, there's some licensing issue. We're not allowed to sell this anymore. But he's like, he was basically said something. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. He basically said, if you buy something else, I'll throw it in there for you.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
That was all right, cool. Awesome. And then, so that's how I managed to get it. But so theoretically, I mean, again, this is a long time ago. I don't know what the story is. I don't know what the reason is why. I don't want to, I'm saying it's a licensing thing, but that's just speculation. I don't know what the reason is why they're not selling this thing. But theoretically, there is a box or 2 of this stuff, maybe, possibly sitting in a Metal Blade warehouse somewhere. I don't know. And they, for whatever reason, they can't sell it. And I don't know what the answer is.
That's a real bummer, man.
Yeah, and this thing's going for money on I looked it up shortly before we came on here, just to, because I remember there was a difference between the LP and the CD. There's more tracks on the CD. Even the CD it's $50 for the CD thing. So the vinyl's going for 80 and up.
But it's probably better to get the CD if it has extra tracks on it. No?
Yeah, it does have the 5 extra songs, including the Witchfinder General song. Yeah, that's true.
All right, so real quick, someone on Spotify has recreated this in a playlist.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we're gonna do, because Jay and I, we compile a playlist, and we'll put a link to this playlist in the show notes for this.
Yeah.
So that you can listen to our playlist, and you can listen to this other guy's playlist of this recreation of this compilation.
Yeah, totally. He went a little. I'm looking at the track listing now. He went a little freestyle at the end here with like live versions and stuff, but maybe because you can't find the studio version somewhere. But most of it, I would say the bulk of his thing up here is the exact compilation in order.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now for anyone out there who's listening to this and is not aware of where I put these playlists, because I've gotten some questions over the last few months. If you go to everythingwentblackmedia.com, that's the website, and each episode has an entry with show notes, and in there, embedded in the show notes for the specific episode, is the Spotify playlist. And also, I put them in the Instagram stories too. Like I share the Spotify playlist on the Instagram stories. So if you guys are following either me, Michael Hill, or Everything Went Black podcast, you'll get a it'll be on it'll be on the Instagram stories. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've got. Did you mention that we made a playlist for this?
Yes. Yeah. So there'll be two embedded playlists in this episode, because we'll have ours, and then we'll have this other cat's recreation of the compilation in this.
Yeah, I would say our playlist is quite good. I'm looking at it now.
No, ours is great. It's probably it's at least I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some choice cuts on there. Both of the playlists have some choice cuts. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that name gets thrown around quite a bit. And I remember, it's funny, back when I was living in Brooklyn, back in going back to like 2007, 2008. There was this whole night that went on that I think the End Records was involved with, called New Wave of Brooklyn Heavy Metal Bands.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
And that was around the time, like 2006, 2007, 2008, where some bands have been, that influence is sort of finding its way back into contemporary bands, I think,
Yeah.
Back then people were discussing it more, I think. And you would talk to some dude at like out, and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, here's my new band. We were like a new wave British heavy metal style band,"
Yeah.
But this night that went on, it really did not feature bands like that sounded like that, though. It was just like some clever, like, okay, these are bands that are new, that don't have any records out, or maybe their first album's out. We're just going to put them on a night at a bar and rock and roll,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of false advertising there.
Yeah. So if you showed up, wanting to hear some bands playing some Angel Witch style music, you weren't going to get it usually back then. So,
there's, what I should mention. There's a couple more compilations I should mention that came out more recently, like 2017, 18, I want to say. And this stuff is even more obscure. Like like I said, the New Wave of British Heavy Metal Revisited, the Metal Blade one, is a good overview. Like, it has some obscure ones. It has all the important ones and some of the better obscure ones. There's these compilations are called Job Center Rejects. And there's 2 volumes. There's a 3rd volume that has Swedish bands, but the first 2 are New Wave of British Heavy Metal. And these are like real obscurities. These are like bands that put out one single, bands that like recorded a demo but never got the single out, like really obscure shit. But there's some really good stuff on there too. And yeah, the compilation, they came out in I think they were both came out in Europe originally, 2017, 2018, and I don't know if they still have them, but they were available domestically. Light in the Attic was selling them on their website, and then I just got mine at Amoeba. They had them when they came out, when Amoeba was back in its other location there. But they're really good if you're into this stuff and you want to do like a deep dive into like stuff you've never heard. These Job Center Rejects compilations are also excellent, and I think they're probably I don't know for sure, but I imagine they're streaming, because I think the way those were done, they're all like above board and licensed and all that stuff. So
Cool.
I think it should be up there. Yeah.
Now let me ask you: is there a definitive book or documentary about this scene?
There is a book that is more like, it's kind of an overview and a list sort of a thing. It's more like it's called Smoke and Valves. And I believe it's a Martin Popoff book, who people will probably know that name. He's written so many heavy metal books. I don't know how he does it. He's written dozens and dozens of metal and hard rock books, but it's called Smoke and Valves, which is, of course, that's the name of a Holocaust song, which is, where he gets the title. So it's Smoke and Valves, a headbanger's guide to 900 new wave of British heavy metal records.
Oh, wow. Damn. So that guy, this, if you're going to look for a volume of writing, this sounds like the one to check out then.
Yeah. And it's more like, and like I said, it's like he does a lot of books like this too, where it's like, sometimes he'll just pick a band or whatever and write it'll be like their history, and he'll interview people and stuff. And this is more like like capsule type reviews of every, and with some biographical information included in that, of all these bands. So 900 new, just that. So there you go. That gives you an idea of how much of this stuff there was. It's pretty cool.
Now, the new wave of British heavy metal and the beginnings of UK punk kind of happened at the same time. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things, this style, this whole thing kind of went unnoticed, especially by the press. There was some very, in my sort of observation, looking back on it. Do you think that the punk explosion of that time period kind of overshadowed coverage of these bands or anything like that?
Well, in the States, I think that maybe is true, because a lot of these bands never made it over here. Obviously, the bigger ones did, but only when they got big.
Right.
Bands like Tigers of Pantang and Witchfinder General, as far as I know, they never made it to the States, and certainly not even more the more obscure bands. In the UK, like I mentioned earlier, Sounds magazine they were under Jeff Barton, who was editor there. They were a big champion of this stuff. They were kind of excited that there was this kind of metal coming back. And I don't know enough about the history of Sounds to know if they were, if these guys were sort of anti-punk. I don't know if that's true. I'm sure there are people who sort of enjoyed all this stuff, but maybe did it in secret because, as we discussed earlier, it wasn't really cool to like punk and metal. But I'm sure there were plenty of people who did, including, I would venture, guys who played in some of these bands, because a lot of this stuff, to me, this new British heavy metal stuff, wouldn't sound like it sounds if not for punk. The number one, Paul Di'Anno is sort of like the number one suspect on that list, I would say. You know what I mean? It's like I don't get how you look and approach things like Paul Di'Anno if you're not a punk fan. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah. But I was just curious, like, how in the UK, there's like the way media handles music is a little bit different. It's a little bit more like they grab onto trends differently than they do in the States.
Yeah.
Sounds being a champion of heavy metal, but like in the bigger sense, like your average punter out there who is looking to buy records or read magazines, I feel like maybe punk was making a little bit more of a splash in the early 80s and the late 70s than heavy metal. Because like if you think about it, punk is kind of like this response to like hard rock, Yes, and bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, this big arena rock kind of thing. So it could be that style of metal, street level metal, wasn't really in fashion. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think also it would have. Even though this timeline seemed really close, I think it wouldn't have been like. So if you think about it, that Sex Pistols record came out, what, 77 or something, or 76? So by the time, like, for example, the first Maiden record came out in 80, the Sex Pistols were broken up.
Yes.
But I mean, there's a story. I hope I'm remembering this right, but I believe so. Maiden played Top of the Pops, which was like the big, like that was like the weekly show in the UK where the top charting, bands would perform. So by this time, by the time that your average kid sitting at home watching Top of the Pops in their parents' living room, by the time they would have seen Maiden on there in 80 or 81 or whatever they were on, a lot of the punk stuff was kind of in the rear view, even though it hadn't been that long. Like the Sex Pistols were done. A lot of the big bands were kind of like fading out. The post-punk thing had already kind of kicked in with like Susie and all that stuff. And I think this is right. If I'm remembering the story right, someone will complain if I got it wrong, but I believe Iron Maiden was the first band to refuse to lip sync on Top of the Pops. Everyone else would go on there and lip sync their own songs. They wouldn't be playing live. They'd just blast the fucking record through the PA. They'd have a live crowd there like it was a show. The band would be on stage, but they'd be playing the record through the PA and the band would just be mimicking. Iron Maiden said, fuck that, we're not doing that. We're going to play. And I believe they were the first band to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing that's really interesting though is like we suspect that some of these guys that were in these new wave of British heavy metal bands were inspired a little bit, at least influenced or reacting to punk, maybe not influenced, maybe reacting to it. You know what I mean? Like they might have been aware of the aggression and speed of punk music and applied that to their execution of hard rock and heavy metal riffing. You know what I mean?
I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true.
And then years later, thrash. They were very clear about their influences coming from hardcore and punk. Those bands like Slayer, Dead Kennedys. They have the Dead Kennedys sticker on the guitar and all that. And then in my estimation, thrash is basically new wave of British heavy metal crossed with hardcore. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's. That doesn't sound crazy to me, and with also, and I think it's also part of that's where Venom I think really comes into play with the new wave of British heavy metal, because when you hear a band like Slayer or even Metallica, and yes, Metallica and Slayer were both, especially Metallica, huge fans of all this stuff, of course. It was also the thing that came in with thrash was it's got to be faster, it's got to be more extreme, and that started with Venom for my money. You know what I mean? Like that idea of extreme metal came from Venom.
I could dig that. Yeah, because they at the time. Like I remember hearing Venom for the first time, like back when I was a young kid, and thinking that this is like the fastest thing I've ever heard. As far as playing goes, like the tempos and the songs were super fast for what was happening back then.
Yeah. And then and that kind of became. I mean, when thrash was in its heyday, that was the thing, right? I mean, that's why. You have bands like Metallica and Megadeth becoming these huge like commercial successes, and obviously Slayer to a lesser degree, but Slayer was also very much about pushing the boundaries of extremity too. And I think a lot of times, so many people point to like Rain and Blood as like the pinnacle of that, and I think it's a great example. But they also, you can hear the Venom in Slayer, absolutely, and I think if you strip away a lot of the noise of Venom, there's like a pop band in there that wants to come out, and I think Slayer were able to, they understood that, because when you hear Rain and Blood, the whole thing's like 28 minutes long, so you're talking about 3-minute songs less, which is like a pop length. Those songs are all like, they're extreme, and they're all about like fucking killing people and Satanism and Dr. Mengele and shit. But they're fucking catchy, memorable songs,
Well, yeah, I mean, Slayer has it. They're, in my opinion, Slayer were the better songwriters out of those original bands. You know what I mean? As far as like songwriting, I'm not
Yeah.
saying and the riffs and just the way the transitions between the riffs, I think was brilliant. I mean, it's a tie between them and Metallica for as far as like sheer songwriting ability.
Yeah.
Like Megadeth is great, but their songs aren't as memorable to me.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, the way I think of it is Megadeth is like sort of you hear these Megadeth songs and they're great, but they're all these movements, especially that stuff. There's like they have all these 7 like 8-minute long songs, which that stuff is cool. It's awesome. And Metallica was like a little lesser degree of that, but neither Metallica or Megadeth really ever got to that point where Slayer got, where it's like we're gonna write a fucking 3-minute song or a 2-minute and 30-second song. I mean, I don't think Metallica or Megadeth has ever done that.
No, they haven't. No, all
I
their
don't.
songs are long, really.
Yeah, I don't think they're. I don't think they are. I don't think they have the ability to trim. I mean, Metallica kind of got there a little bit with the Black Album. They trimmed a lot of fat, certainly. But even some of those songs are like 4 or 5 minutes. They never got to that 2.5-minute, 3-minute level that Slayer hit, where it's like it's a fucking total banger, totally memorable, and you just want to hear it again.
I'll agree with that. I mean, when I first came out of, I was into punk and then I got into like thrash, you know what I mean? And Metallica was my favorite band originally.
Yeah.
But as time went on, I really just ended up becoming more of a Slayer fan, for that reason, because it was like, the riffs were just stuck in my head, like everything, all the transitions and the songwriting and all that sort of stuff to me, just like it's stuck in my head more, and also I liked all the satanic like shit too,
Yeah, of course. Who doesn't like Satan?
If you have to like Satan, man, hell, There's a couple of bands in here that I'm not familiar with that you got on your list. Tokyo Blade and Quartz.
Yeah, Tokyo Blade, Quartz. Yeah, those are like a little more. I guess those are both of those bands put out full lengths. I believe they were not like super obscure singles type bands. But again, they were very much of that movement. Like it's super catchy, memorable, like a singer who's like actually singing. You have a lot of good, guitar. I can't remember if both those bands have 2 guitar players. I can't remember, but there is like some guitar interplay. They very much of that movement, and there's some great. I believe I put a Tokyo Blade song on our playlist. If people want to check it out, let me just double check. I think I seem to remember putting one on there. Yes, Night of the Blade by Tokyo Blade, which is a great track. And you know what? I didn't put a Quartz song on there. I should have. Maybe I'll
you can
add
it for sure, man. This is not going to go up for a couple of weeks, so you
all right, I'll add a Quartz. I'll add a Quartz song so people can check it out. But yeah, they were like, again, some of this stuff, Tokyo Blade and Quartz are like kind of like this sort of, I don't know, if you've got, Def Leppard and Maiden at the top tier that went, global, and then your kind of next level is like your Diamond Head, and your Girl School and maybe Saxon, and then you drop down one. Then you've got like Tokyo and Quartz, with the bands that were like they put out records and like they did some stuff, and then you get down to these bands that were like on these Job Center Reject compilations I talked about earlier, that were like bands that put out one single and disappeared, or bands like recorded a demo, like or a 2-song demo that never got pressed or whatever, stuff like that. Then you're kind of really at the sort of in the cave of obscurity there. But a lot of that stuff is great. I mean, like anything, anyone who listens, you're going to like some bands better than others, but some of the obscure stuff is well worth your time.
There's a couple other bands here. Like I just want to note Paul Di'Anno's post Iron Maiden career.
Yeah,
included Battlezone, which has a couple. I put a Battlezone track on the playlist too, which is actually pretty. They're obviously not nearly as sick as Iron Maiden, but still pretty good.
Yeah, I do have I have a Battlezone LP actually somewhere.
I have a CD. I don't have the actual. I don't have any vinyl by them though.
Yeah.
There's Diano, you know.
Yep.
Which
Yep.
following the trend of naming your band after using your last name. You know.
Sure. Yeah. In Danzig, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know,
Van
Vandenberg, Van Halen. You know.
Yeah.
I read back when Quiet Riot was gonna reform. You know, when they put out Metal Health.
Yeah.
Originally, the band was going to be called Dubrow.
Yeah, I think Quiet Riot was the way to go.
That was definitely the way to go. Especially like, you know, Kevin Dubrow is not the most charismatic, you know, guy up there on stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have to agree.
Yeah.
I have to agree.
Kind of a marginal voice too, really.
Yeah, you know what? I think I was like a child when, the Quiet Riot stuff came out. And I also had I didn't know. I mean, I was a kid, so I didn't know that their biggest hits were Slade songs, you know, like they're like
Come On, Feel the Noise. And
yeah. And I think they did Mama, We're All Crazy Now.
Yep.
But Metal Health, Bang Your Head, that was an original that they did. I didn't know anything about that. And I certainly didn't know their history with Randy Rhoads and all that stuff, which is a whole different story. I just thought it was I just thought it was catchy, you know. Catchy stuff. I didn't learn till much later. You know, oh man, I got to find this article and send it to you. I did an interview with the photographer who, and I believe he's also the guy. So, you know, you remember the cover of Metal Health, the guy in that?
Yeah, with the mask.
So I believe, if I can remember the story, I believe the photographer is also the guy in the mask, like he did a self-portrait or something.
Oh, wow.
And I interviewed him about that for Revolver years and years ago when I was doing this series of articles about like the making of famous album covers. I got to find that and send it to you, but it was pretty cool to get that story about how that was done. Cause I mean, that album cover was like, it's still like striking, you know?
Absolutely. I think I had a t-shirt with that album cover on it when I was like 13 or whatever, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, I remember thinking it was awesome when I was 7 and I still think it's awesome.
Yeah. It's funny. Cause I did know, because, you know, the Ozzy stuff was out with Randy Rhoads on it. And I was like, you know, reading up and, you know, Hit Parader about everything. And I was like, oh, you know, he was into Randy Rhoads was in this band Quiet Riot. And then I remember when that record came out, you know, I didn't know any better. I thought Randy Rhoads was going to be on it, you know. And that's probably what they were banking on. People thinking that, oh, some record that Randy made when he was in Quiet Riot, you know, maybe. Because there were a couple of LPs that Randy Rhoads recorded with them that were only released in Japan.
Right. Yeah. And they go for money now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have like rips of those records, like MP3s. They're not that good, really. Yeah. You know, even the guitar playing, he's not shredding like he did in Ozzy's band. You know.
No.
But so yeah, I picked that up, and the one thing I didn't remember is Kevin Dubrow's voice was not what I was hoping it would be.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's passed away, so I don't want to speak ill of him, but that's all I have to say about it. You know.
No, you know, speaking of, I unintentionally spoke ill of Kevin Dubrow. This is one of the weirdest things that has ever happened in my career as a quote unquote journalist. I used to have a column in Decibel magazine called Cry Now, Cry Later.
Yes.
And a lot of this stuff was like fantasy headaches, like stuff that I would just sort of make up. And so I wrote this story about like going to South America and seeing some South American black metal bands, and then like somehow running into Kevin Dubrow at this show and like doing cocaine with him in a men's room. And then like, so I wrote that, and you know, there's like a lead time with magazine. So I wrote it. And so the time between me writing it and turning it in and the magazine coming out was like 2 months. Right.
Right. In
those 2 months, Kevin Dubrow died.
Oh man, dude.
Of a heart attack from doing cocaine.
Wow. And you know, the editor didn't step in and be like, "Hey, look, you know, you got to rework this a little bit."
No, it was too late. Like it was
already in the presses. Oh man.
Yeah. Oh, it was too late. It was way too late. There was nothing that could be done. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think Kevin Dubrow probably would have he would have approved, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll never know.
Yeah. Deano had another band called Gog Magog, which is out, which was it fell within that time period roughly, I guess. And that is not on Spotify or any streaming service.
You know what? I have to say, I've not heard Gog Magog.
Yep. It's, I don't even know what it sounds like because I've never heard it either. I just know about it. And I'm sure you can find the records out there somewhere, but I haven't been able to come across anything. There's no streaming. YouTube has some stuff,
Okay.
But that's about it, really. Maybe I'll post that too, like on a Facebook page or something.
Yeah.
There is another band that if you research new wave or British heavy metal, this band comes up. And I think you and I might have discussed these guys, Starfighters. Are you familiar with them? Yeah.
Yeah.
They're also not on Spotify. They're not on Amazon Music or any of these places. But the notable thing is it features the nephew of Stevie Young, the nephew of Angus and Malcolm Young of AC/DC.
Yeah.
It's basically his band. And they have 2 full lengths. The one that I'm familiar with is called Starfighters, self-titled. Yep. And the song to go to would be a song called Alley Cat Blues. And I'm going to include that as the outro on this episode. Yeah. And it's awesome. I remember I heard that song on the radio when I was a kid. And there was, I think it was I-95 or one of these radio stations, hard rock radio stations. And I remember it in the room that I grew up in when I was living with my parents. I had like this little radio set up with a cassette deck, that kind of thing. And I was, listening to music. And this song came on and I was like, man, this song is like pretty awesome. And then I waited for the DJ to say who it was. And he said it was Starfighters, Alley Cat Blues. So for decades, I've been repping this band, and I don't know anyone else who's ever really heard of these guys.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's that's such a weird, because I think, so I'm trying to think how that even happened, because do you think did Stevie Young just grow up in the UK? The Young, I mean, I know they grew up in Australia, but were they born in the UK?
They were Scots. They were Scottish.
Right. Okay. Right. That's what I thought.
Same thing as Bon Scott too.
Right. Okay.
So I imagine the Young family, maybe some of the Youngs stayed in the UK, and Malcolm and Angus, because they were the nephew. Yeah. So they were like his uncles. They moved to Australia.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That Starfighters is worth checking out for sure. So I think I touched on it earlier and we mentioned it, but I just want to kind of recommend it again and note a sort of weird thing about it. The band Holocaust that we talked about earlier, the new wave of British heavy metal band, they did that song Smoke and Valves that the Martin Popoff's, book guide, new wave of heavy metal guide is named after. They also did the song The Small Hours, which Metallica covered on the Garage Days Revisited EP. Now, The Small Hours, what's interesting about that song is it's only on like a live record. In fact, I think it's only on, and what's crazy is I think it's only on, so Holocaust put out their first full length, was called The Nightcomers, which is excellent. I highly recommend that. To anyone who is interested in this stuff. That whole record is pretty awesome. And I believe that band, 6 Feet Under, Chris Barnes's post Cannibal Corpse band, they covered a great Holocaust song called Death or Glory. The song that Metallica covered, Small Hours, is only on a release called Live from the Raw, Loud and Live tour. So it's only on a live thing, and there's an EP and there's a VHS of this, and the Small Hours is only on the VHS. So that shows you how deep Metallica were into this stuff. They recorded a song that was only on a live VHS, That's
how it goes, though, man. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like a great song just transcends medium,
Yeah.
It's like I can totally relate to watching that I mean, you know, I relate to that attitude about things where it's like, no matter where you hear it, no matter what the physical medium you're using to hear this thing, if it's awesome, it just stays with you, and you have to somehow express it. You know, it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and now I should worth mentioning, just talking about the Holocaust were Scottish too, which I didn't realize. So, and here's a fun note: the band was located in Boston, Massachusetts for some time. What?
Really?
Crazy.
Wow.
I'm on Metal Archives right now, and for anyone out there, I do find that to be a pretty reliable. Like if you're looking up stuff about metal bands, I mean, or anything in general, don't use Wikipedia. But you know, if you're looking something about metal bands, Metal Archives is great, and it has very good, reliable information about, you know, release dates and interesting facts and all that stuff, different formats of different records, and it's a great resource out there.
Yeah, I use that a lot to find out about bands for sure. You know, for information, lineups, like things like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's great. It's great. I mean, it's something I use like pretty much every day. I think in my work, which is so yeah. I recommend it highly to anyone out there who is, you know, you need to have all the useless information. We've got all of it.
Now, as far as writing goes, you got anything cool coming out? Any interesting stuff that you want to talk about?
Let's see. There's a new Decibel that's out right now. Our friends Cave In are on the cover, which makes me happy. I did not write the Cave In story though. I did an interview with Lord Ahriman from Dark Funeral.
I saw that. Yes.
Yeah. And that was pretty good. And I got one coming out. I don't know if I can say. I have two more. So I do. You know, like we were talking about earlier, with print magazines, which Decibel is a print magazine. You know, the time between me writing the article and the article coming out is usually a couple of months. So I have, and every issue I do a Q&A, and the next two are done and they're cool. But I guess maybe I can't say what they are, because Decibel hasn't said anything about it yet. So I got to keep my lips. Oh, but I did. Okay, so in Revolver, I did a cover story on Ghost.
That's great.
Yeah, that I believe I don't have my copy yet, but I believe that's out, and I know they announced it, so I know I can run my mouth about that one. I'm not letting any cats out of any bags, but yeah, a lovely chat with Papa, you know.
And Revolver is one of the few print magazines that's still out there.
Yep, Revolver and Decibel. Decibel comes out every month, and Revolver, I believe, is 4 times a year. I think that's right. Quarterly, I think. Or yeah, is that right?
I think it's quarterly, and it's a nice, collectible style thing.
Yeah, you know? Like they do a lot. Like they do a lot of stuff where it'll be like, when the issue comes out, it'll be like 4 different covers. You know,
right.
Either it'll be like, one band with like each member on the cover, or they'll do, I don't know what they did this time, but I think Ghost is one cover, and I think whatever the other articles are in there, I don't know what they are. I think there's Papa on the cover of one, and then depending which issue you get in the mail, if you're a subscriber or something, you might get someone else on the cover. Another story that's in the magazine. Who knows? I don't know. Or you collect them all. Some people do that.
That's kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of cool how some print magazines are doing that. I know Fangoria does that. Like they put out less issues, but for example, Fangoria is like 100 pages now, and it's evergreen content. Like it's not newsy stuff. It's more about deeper dives into different stuff associated with horror and stuff like that. And I kind of appreciate that more about just the onslaught of current things coming out, and this new record and that new record and that kind of thing.
Do you have a subscription to Fangoria?
Yes, I do.
Would you recommend it? Is it good?
I would recommend Rue Morgue over Fangoria.
Rue Morgue. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Rue Morgue is like, for me, the go-to, and my opinions align more with Rue Morgue's opinions, like when it comes to movies and whatnot.
Okay.
So yeah, that's those two are great though. I mean, I have subscriptions to both because I'm like a horror fanatic. So And yeah, why are you thinking? Are you interested in that?
Yeah, well, here's what happened. I recently signed up for Shudder.
Oh yeah,
Um,
man. Yep.
and I it was crazy. So when Shudder first came out, I was in line with a buddy of mine to go see Fabio Frizzi perform
Nice.
some of the music from his films. I was at the Egyptian Theater, I think, in Hollywood. And Shudder, I had never heard of it. Shudder was brand new, and they were basically like they had like street team people out there saying, "Hey man, like if you sign up for this new thing, Shudder will give you a month free, and like we'll give you like a ticket so you can get a free beer inside for the movie." I was like, all right, fuck. Me and my friend were like, of course. So I got Shudder right when it came out, and they had some cool stuff, but they didn't have a lot of stuff because they just started, And so in my month, I kind of like saw everything I wanted to see, and I was like, all right, that's cool. I'm not gonna like continue with it though because I've kind of seen everything I wanted to see. Now, obviously, that was years ago, and Shudder's got so much better. So I signed up for it like about a month ago, and so I'm getting like checking out all the stuff I haven't seen in years, and then other stuff that I've never seen before, and then all the new stuff they have, and now they have originals and stuff. I'm sure you know all this. But so now I'm like, oh fuck, I'm like back in that zone of like checking out horror movies regularly. So,
Yeah,
I like
I would go with Rue Morgue, man, because it's
Okay.
a little cheaper, and I feel like their coverage is a little bit more honest. And not to say that they're dishonest at Fangoria, but it's like
Right.
it's like not how it goes with magazines where it's like if you spend X amount of dollars on like advertising or something like
Sure.
that, they might skew more towards you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I feel like Rue Morgue is a little bit more on the up and up when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to like accuse anyone of anything, but that's just my feelings about it.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, yeah, man, I'm gonna check it out. Maybe I do like I'm definitely one of those people like, I like to have the magazine in my hand,
Yeah,
and read.
totally.
I spend so much time on the stupid computer anyway, that it's like when it's time to read a book or, like someone gave me a Kindle as a gift years ago. I used it like once and I was like, I can't do this. I can't do it. I just want like a regular book in my hand,
I'm obviously I mean a huge book fan, but I have the Kindle app on my tablet, and I do use that for things. There's certain like for example, I'm really into like weird fiction, so the Weird Tales magazines, like you can get them on the Kindle for like nothing.
The
Almost.
old one.
They're the old ones. Yep. They have all these like collections, all the old stories, like all the old, Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, all the stuff that was in Weird Tales, like would show up in these compendiums and stuff that you never heard of. So you can buy those. There's also magazines that there's this one called Dark, that's $1 a month on Kindle, and it's all short stories and stuff that's just like, dark fiction, dark fantasy, cosmic horror, like stuff like that,
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have the Bible on my Kindle.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's like, I'm not a Christian. Obviously not into, religion. I mean, I like reading about religions and I find all that stuff interesting. So rather than have this gigantic tome like laying around, I figured I'd just download it on my Kindle. So there it is.
That's the way to go. I just had, you know what? I think from like all the Catholic school, I just was like forced to ingest all that stuff. So I kind of like, even though I do admit some of those stories are pretty good, especially the Old Testament ones.
Oh yeah.
I just kind of like, I just have like this sort of lingering resentment for all that stuff just because it was like forced upon me.
Sure. No, that's understandable. Like I'm not recommending anyone read the Bible and then like, but it's like, just something that's part of like the, the tapestry of literature that's out there, and like I also have all this like Hindu stuff on there and different things and, but yeah, for things that you don't want to spend real money on, because like the Kindle stuff is super cheap usually.
Yeah.
And you're like, I want to read this, but I don't really care if I have it as a book, and for research purposes, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, right on, man. Thanks a lot. This was cool. And yeah, just a reminder to you guys, definitely check out the playlists. We're gonna post the that track collection that the other dude put together, and then Jay and I are gonna have our playlist on here, which has got a lot of great stuff in it. And I'm gonna find some of that Gog Magog stuff and the Starfighters LP and post that on the Everything Went Black Facebook page when this episode comes out on the YouTube videos, because I think that's the only way you can find that stuff right now without paying for it. That is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna add I'm gonna dig up a Quartz track and add it to our playlist, because I realize now that I did not add one. So I will correct that mistake, that oversight.
And to take us out of the episode, we're going to play Alley Cat Blues by Starfighters. Take care, everybody.